Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. It's May 17, 2025 in Radhajesh, Belgium. Today's the disappearance day of, that's not my computer making that noise. It's, okay. And Jai, last time, evidently I was here last year on the disappearance day of Ramananda Roy. So we decided instead of my giving that presentation again, I would give this one, and I think that this is a very appropriate presentation on the disappearance day of Ramananda Roy. So we're going to be doing this in, what is that?
The light.
Huh? No, the beep. Anybody know what that beep is?
I think it's a little bit of a reverb.
Oh. So this is really going to be a two-part class. So you're not going to be that happy at the end of today's class. Usually I like to leave people happy at the end of the class, but you're not going to be that happy because there's not going to be a resolution today. The resolution is going to come tomorrow. All right? So we're focusing here on Krishna's return to Ras Leela. I put this together originally as the three-part presentation, so we're going to do parts 1 and 2 today, and part 3 tomorrow. And I became inspired to do this. I was reading Ananda Vrindavan Champu and how Kavi Kanapur was writing about Krishna's return to the Ras Leela, and I just felt so inspired that I thought, wow, this is something so wonderful that I'd really like to share it with others, how Krishna is responding to his devotees. So in one sense, this story starts during the time of Lord Ramachandra. So when the sages saw Lord Ram in the Dandaka forest, they wanted to marry him. But they couldn't because he had taken this vow of only one wife. So he told them, you can be with me in this relationship when I appear as Krishna, millions and millions of years from now. So they had to wait for millions of years. Also, when Krishna appeared in the previous day of Lord Brahma, the personified Vedas were watching his pastimes. And they had the same aspiration. They said, oh, we want to be gopis in Krishna's pastimes. But they had to wait for another day of Lord Brahma. Mahalakshmi, was your mission successful? Yes, okay. So how many billions and billions of years did they have to wait? So sometimes, like George Harrison had his song, it takes so long, right? But we're not thinking I'm going to have to wait millions or billions of years. So they were waiting millions and billions of years to be gopis in Krishna's Leela. And then, when Krishna appeared again, they appeared as gopis in Krishna's Leela. Of course, even then, when Krishna took their clothes when they were worshipping Katyayani, he said, later I'll call you. So again, they're waiting. And finally, one night, they hear Krishna's flute, and each gopi is feeling that Krishna is just calling her. And so, in the middle of the night, they sneak out of their house, and they go, finally, after waiting for so long, I'm going to finally get my desires fulfilled and serve Krishna in this way. And then when they come, what does Krishna say? By the way, this verse is basically identical to what he tells the wives of the Brahmanas. It says, transcendental love for me arises by the devotional processes of hearing about me, seeing my deity form, meditating on me, and faithfully chanting my glories. The same result is not achieved by mere physical proximity, so please go home. And they're like, we're not going home. The wise of the Brahmanas, they said, okay, we'll go home. They're like, no, we're not going home. Our acharyas say, generally Krishna's chasing after the gopis. It's like that even in the material world. Generally the male is chasing the female. Yes? But sometimes Krishna wants the gopis to chase him. So he set this up. Because usually they're like, no, we don't want anything to do with you. But in this case, like, we want you. No, we're not going home. So Krishna says, all right. They started walking and playing and embracing. They were playing and laughing together. And the gopis thought, now all of our desires are fulfilled. We are so fortunate. Finally, after all these millions and billions of years of waiting, now we're with Krishna. And then, he was just gone. He's just gone. They looked everywhere for him. They became practically crazy. They started thinking that they were Krishna. They were so deep into imitating his pastimes. They're looking, where is he? Everywhere. They're following his footprints, looking through the forest. They found that he'd even abandoned Srimati Radharani. Going through the dark night, following his footprints, and they said, you know, Krishna doesn't want to be with us. He's running away, and if we keep looking for him, he's just going to go further and further and further away, and then he's going to hurt his feet. Maybe it's better we just sit down and wait for him and sing. Tava katamrita tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmasapaham. And then he returned. This painting we commissioned for our Manashiksha book. It was made by Gananjana. As far as I know, this is the only painting that actually accurately depicts the Bhagavatam verses that describes when Krishna returns to the Ras Lila. So you see, this is the 8 principal gopis, not Srimati Radharani's 8 associates, but the 8 principal gopis. There are different lists in different places. But you see Srimati Radharani there. She's angry, and she's not going to Krishna. She's waiting for him to come to her. She's angry that he left. And there you see Lalita against the tree. She's just meditating on Krishna. As he's not looking at her, she feels comfortable to just stare at him. And then you have Vishaka. Now, she's actually described as standing, but Gananjana said it would mess up the artistic balance if he had her standing. So I said, okay, you can make her sitting. They're also wearing the type of dress that's described by our acharyas. So Vishaka took Krishna into her heart, closed her eyes, and was meditating on him as if she were a great yogi. Then another left-wing gopi is Shamala, and she goes up to Krishna, but she grabs his left arm and puts it around her shoulders. So she's another gopi leader. She has her own group, but she's friendly to Srimati Radharani. So those are the 4 chief left-wing gopis. Then you see the 4 chief right-wing gopis. So Chandravali is coming up and holding Krishna's right hand between her 2 hands. And her chief associate Padma is about to put Krishna's lotus foot on her breast. And her other chief associate Bhadra has just gotten Krishna's chewed betel nut. And she's worshipping that betel nut. Then not mentioned in the Bhagavatam, but mentioned by our acharyas, is Bhadra. And because she's not in the verse, there's no description exactly of what she was doing, but she's very famous for playing a veena and wearing clothes that have pictures on them. So she's also a leader, a gopi leader, and she's friendly to Chandravali. So we have the 4 chief left-wing gopis and the 4 chief right-wing gopis, and how they're receiving Krishna when he returns. Okay, so we're going to look at verses 15 and 16. So I was wondering if we could just recite these together. If we could together, instead of back and forth, we could together recite the Sanskrit and the English. Sabha jayitvatam anangadipanam sahasjali lekshana vibramabura samsparshane katkakritangri hastayo samstutja ishat kupita babasire. Sri Krishna had awakened romantic desires within the gopis, and they honored him by glancing at him with playful smiles, gesturing amorously with their eyebrows, and massaging his hands and feet as they held them in their laps. Even while worshipping him, however, they felt somewhat angry, and thus they addressed him as follows. Again, all together. Shri Gopya Uchu Bhajato Numhajantyeka Eka Etad Viparyayam Nobhyayam Cha Bhajantyeka Eta No Bruhi Sadhubo. The gopis said, some people reciprocate the affection only of those who are affectionate toward them, while others show affection even to those who are indifferent or inimical, and yet others will not show affection toward anyone. Dear Krishna, please properly explain this matter to us. So it was mentioned, it was shown on the first slide, but just to explain. So this presentation is from the Bhagavatam itself, from Srila Prabhupada's Krishna book, and from Ananda Vrindavan Champu. And in the Bhagavatam, the commentaries, look at the commentaries of Srila Jiva Goswami, Srila Sanatana Goswami, and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So what were the gopis thinking? They were thinking, who calls for their beloved and then abandons her? What do we call this nowadays? Ghosting, right? Imagine if you were waiting for months to go on a date with somebody, and finally you go on a date with them, and you're sitting in the restaurant, and you place your order, and they say, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom, and they disappear. So they're waiting for billions and billions of years to see Krishna, and he calls them, come, dance with me. And they come, and he says, go home. And then they say, no, I'm going to stay, and he's walking with them, and then he just disappears. They say, how is this proper gentlemanly behavior? So we may sometimes feel like this. We may sometimes feel, well, I'm a victim. I'm doing everything for Krishna. Where is he? How come I don't hear him? Why don't I see him? Why doesn't he reciprocate with me? Is he enjoying just abandoning me? I said, we should question him, and we should question him in paradoxical language. We're going to force Krishna to admit that he's not grateful. We're going to, sometimes people do this. They ask a general philosophical question, but actually there's some motive, yeah? Well, hypothetically, asking for a friend, I'd kind of like to know about this, but they're doing it specifically to accuse Krishna. So again, Krishna had awakened their romantic desires, and they're massaging Krishna's hands and feet. But internally, they're feeling angry. Now, they also didn't want to show how angry they were, because they thought if we do that, Krishna might leave again. So let's hide our anger and just ask politely. I said, oh, joy of ours. Remember, they're angry. Now, please give us answers on one topic. We're just village women. We're not educated. We don't know anything. We haven't studied the Vedas. We don't know what's right and what's wrong. By the way, that's a good attitude to have whenever you're asking anybody a question. Like I used to teach my Gurukul students. Right, they'd come up to ask me a question. I'd say, do you want to know Or do you want to argue? Right? And I said, at least you should say, I'm confused. I said, start off with, I'm confused. I said, if you think I'm wrong, start off with, I'm confused. And be thinking, maybe I'm wrong, 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 maybe I'm wrong. One time I was talking with one of my sons, and I made some statement, and he said, Mata, are you sure? I said, I'm sure. And there was a pause, and he said, are you 100% sure? And then I thought, maybe he knows something I don't know. So if we're going to ask a question, want to know the answer, and especially if we're sure that we're right, it's better to say, I'm confused, and be thinking, maybe I'm wrong. They said, you're very learned. You can answer this question properly. So they wanted Krishna to show with his own words that he was ungrateful. So they were hiding their real intention, and what did they ask? They said, who's the best, most honest, loving person? What do you think? So the gopis give 3 categories of persons. They say there are some people who reciprocate the love only of those who show love toward them. You love me, I'll love you back. You don't love me, I won't love you back. How much you love me, how you love me, I'll reciprocate in that way. They said our second category of persons is people who love everybody. They love people even whether those people reciprocate them or not. And then their third category is people who don't love anybody. And people who love those who love them in the same way. People who love everybody, people who love no one. And they were thinking, so who are you? They were saying, Krishna, we don't know. Who's the best? Can you explain this to us? So what were they really asking? Do you have love for us, indifference, or enmity? Now, of course, yes, these are the gopis, but we may also do this kind of thing. We may take our material understandings, our material categories, and kind of project them onto Krishna. And we're going to see tomorrow how Krishna talks about how he's all of these and none of these. So the gopis are thinking, there's 3 we don't know which of these. Do you love us, do you not care, or do you hate us? If you love us, do you love us conditionally? Well, no. If you loved us conditionally, then when we're doing things for you, you would reciprocate. But here we are and you left, so that's not conditional. Maybe it's unconditional. Well, no, it can't be unconditional because you abandoned us in the middle of the forest. That was the forest, by the way, folks. There were tigers and stuff there. And even though we were in distress, you didn't show up. I mean, we may wonder, what is the nature of love? How does Krishna love me? They said, maybe you just don't care. Do you ever feel like that? Maybe Krishna just doesn't care on this tiny little jiva, on this tiny little planet, this tiny little universe. I said, no, you definitely care because you do things to make us happy and you do things to make us sad. So you must care. Do you just hate us always? Well, that can't be right because you do show love for us. Maybe we've done something wrong. But no, we didn't do anything wrong. So what's going on? So this example of the gopis is very relevant to us. That if we don't understand, we should ask. And we can ask Krishna in the heart. We can ask Krishna in the heart. So a couple weeks ago, one devotee asked me a question, should I do this or this? I said, why don't you ask Krishna? I said, ask him to make it clear. So it doesn't have to be clear to anyone else, but ask him to make it clear to you. I said, there's one caveat. If you ask Krishna to make something clear to you, do you know what the caveat is?
His own time scale.
Well, he will do it in his own time scale. I find he does it fairly quickly.
What does caveat mean?
condition.
He may do something that you don't like.
He may tell you something you don't like. He may show you something you don't like. He may give you an answer you didn't want to hear. You know, like before I went to the doctor, I'm like, please let it not be broken. Please let it not be broken. Or maybe do something you don't want to hear. So what's our condition? If we're going to ask Krishna, please show me the answer, we have to be willing to listen. Yeah? Right? Just yesterday someone was telling me, you know, people will ask me advice and I tell them and then they don't want to listen, right? Many years ago, a friend of mine said to me, Urmila, what's my biggest problem in bhakti? And I thought, well, that's obvious to everybody who knows you. But I didn't want to tell her. Because how she would probably react was also obvious to everyone who knows her. So I said, well, you don't have any problems. You don't have any problems. She kept pressing me over several weeks. Well, finally I thought, foolishly, maybe she really wants to know. And so I said to her, you don't have any big problems, which wasn't totally accurate. I said, but there's this little thing. No, it's very little. It's not of any importance. But there's this little thing. And there was an explosion. And it was like 2 or 3 weeks that I was getting emails and phone calls and, how dare you say I have this problem? So that was many years ago, but the reaction was so severe and so long lasting that I have never, ever been honest with her again. Just never. I keep my relationship with her completely superficial. So when we ask Krishna, please reveal the answer to me, we have to be willing to know the truth, to believe the truth, and to act on the truth. Now, if we do that, then Krishna is very eager to talk to us next time. So this devotee who asked me a few weeks ago, what should I do? I said, the caveat is you have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to believe the truth and act on the truth. And then he told me, he said, he grew up in Krishna consciousness. He said, when I was young, I would regularly ask Krishna things. He would regularly reveal the answer to me. And then one day I didn't act on it. He said, I regularly acted on it. One day I didn't, he said, and then I lost that for years. I'm like, yeah, that's how it works. I mean, Krishna has many ways to reveal it to us. It's not necessarily that the deity is going to speak to us directly like he did, like Shakshi Gopal. You know, sometimes the answer is you just open up one of Prabhupada's books and there's your answer in the purport, isn't it? Yes? Or you're just listening to a lecture and just, there it is. Or somebody even says something to you casually, or you just notice something. Krishna has an infinite number of ways. In this particular topic today, how does Krishna love us? So one of my god sisters, who's been doing Sankirtan for many, 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 many years, amazing, amazing devotee. She said one time she was just feeling, does Krishna really love me? Does he even know I exist? Does he really care about me? Right, so she's out on Sankirtan and she's thinking like that, and 2 minutes later, some random stranger comes up to her and hands her a balloon that says, God loves you. You know? Yeah. So ask, if we don't understand Krishna, how are you dealing with it? Why are you dealing with me this way? Why are you dealing with me? I mean, even the gopis were confused. Krishna, why are you dealing with us this way? Ask. As long as you're willing to accept the answer, which may not be the answer you wanted. And then to act on that. All right, so what does Krishna answer? Now, today we're just giving part of the answer, and tomorrow we're going to give the rest of the answer. And if you're not so happy at the end of this class, I did warn you that, yes? But you'll be really happy tomorrow. Okay, so we're going to look at verses 17, 18, 19, where he answers. And here we can again say these together. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Mitcho Bhajanti Sakya Swartai Kanto Jamahite na chatra soridam dharma swadartam ta dinanyata. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, so-called friends who show affection for each other only to benefit themselves are actually selfish. They have no true friendship, nor are they following the true principles of religion. Indeed, if they did not expect benefit for themselves, they would not reciprocate. Bhajanta bhajato ye vai karuna pitaro yata dharmo nirapavado tra soridam cha sumajjama. My dear slender-waisted gopis, some people are genuinely merciful, or like parents, naturally affectionate. Such persons who devotedly serve even those who fail to reciprocate with them are following the true faultless path of religion, and they are true well-wishers. Bhajatopi navaikechid bhajantya bhajata kuta atmarama yaprakama akritagya guru druha. Then there are those individuals who are spiritually self-satisfied, materially fulfilled, or by nature ungrateful or simply envious of superiors. Such persons will not love even those who love them, what to speak of those who are inimical. So Krishna is taking the 3 categories of the gopis and he's expanding them into 9. So basically Krishna here is going to describe the 9 types of relationships. And as we go through them, I think it's helpful to think, how do I act in any of these? Are any of these applicable to me? So Krishna of course knew what they were actually asking. And so his answer was also a little humorous, and he looked at them very sweetly. Okay, so people who reciprocate the love only of those who show love to them. So Krishna says, if you're doing something for someone else just to benefit yourself, that's just selfish. Remember we were talking about the modes of nature, and we were talking about charity? What mode is this? Passion. This is Rajaguna. I'm giving something, but only because I want to get something back. That's no friendship. He said, this just like you buy something from a shop. You know, you're buying something from a shop, and the merchant is trying to get your money, and you're trying to get a good deal, right? If something's on sale, you're not thinking, oh, the poor merchant, they must be losing money. Let me pay you more. You're trying to get a deal, they're trying to get a deal. It's not a loving relationship. It's very heavy, where Krishna is saying there's no dharma, no prema, no friendship, no happiness, no religiousness. He says, even if you have no love, you're better than people who have this kind of relationship. So there was a very famous book about man-woman relationships. And in it, he was talking about how men and women keep score. Now, I'm sure all of those generalizations about males and females are generalizations. There are always exceptions and things. But just this idea, you know, that people are keeping, unconsciously, they're keeping score. Well, I did this, what about you did this, what about you did this, what about you do this? How do we know we're having this kind of relationship? Anybody? Thoughts? What's your evidence that our relationship with someone is like this?
That if I stop giving, the other person stops giving.
Okay, you're looking at it from their having that kind of relationship. How do you know you're doing it? Huh? There may be some calculating, although that may be kind of subconscious. You're not happy when what happens?
When they don't give you something.
Exactly. How we respond when the other person doesn't reciprocate the way we think that we have. And you'll hear this kind of conversation going on. You didn't do this. And you know, I did this, and 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 you didn't even do that. Do you understand what I'm saying? Or if we don't say it, we're thinking that. I've given this, I've given this, I've given this, I've given this. We have a list. And I've given this with the expectation you would give this and this and this. And you didn't. And I'm fried. Now, I should say that we cannot get rid of this mentality artificially. You cannot pretend that you don't have this mentality. It will explode eventually anyway. So I know of a marriage of 5 kids. They got divorced after 10 years, and the man was completely blindsided. He said, I thought we had a wonderful marriage. I thought my wife was happy. What she was doing for 10 years was never complaining about anything. And she was just stuffing it and stuffing it and stuffing it and stuffing it. You know, with the tectonic plates, they build up pressure and then finally there's an earthquake. And unfortunately, once there was an earthquake, with 10 years of pent-up frustrations, there was no solving it anymore. It was very unfortunate, and she especially, it was very unfortunate for her. What happened with her after that in her life was especially extremely unfortunate materially and spiritually. So we can't fake this. We can't say, I'm not having a merchant mentality with you when we actually do. It will end up manifesting itself. But anytime that we react very negatively and with a feeling of entitlement, with a feeling of offense, and we can do this, you know, even I've given so much to ISKCON, and what are they doing for me? I've given so much to this, I've given so much to that, what am I getting back? Yeah?
It can also happen in community, right?
Yes, it can also happen in a community.
This, what are the others doing? And you get this frustration that I
Yes.
do so much, and what are they doing actually?
Yes. There's a book I read some time ago, I think it was Predictably Irrational, I think it was that book, about that there's 2 main types of relationships. One is a family type relationship and one's a business type relationship. In a business type relationship, things are very clear. I do this work, I get this payment. I get this benefits. What I give, what I get is very, very clear. In a family relationship, it's very unclear. I'm giving, I'm getting, and there's a general mood that everybody will just help each other out as needed. And in a family relationship, people will often give more than they feel they can at that moment, with the assumption that the other party is also going to reciprocate when they're in need. And you can't mix those. Like he was giving the example, you know, you can't go to dinner at your grandma's house and then say, now what do I owe you for the dinner? Your grandmother would actually be very offended. He was saying you can give your grandmother an expensive gift, right? And even, you know, we can give money if it's packaged as a gift. Like we even have those little envelopes, you know, where you package it as a gift rather than as a payment. So that's accepted. And the problem is if it's actually a business relationship and you pretend that it's a family relationship. So this problem happens when you say, oh, we're a big family on love and trust, but it's actually not operating that way. And so then people think, well, I'm going to give everything and I'm going to get everything. But that's not actually what's going on. So sometimes things are more clear if we pay people. Many, many years ago, I mediated a dispute between a temple and a family, where this family had come from another country, husband and wife, and they actually had a written agreement with the temple, what the temple would provide for them and what service they would do. Then over the years, they changed that agreement many, many times orally, but they never changed it in writing. All right, so it was the temple authorities who first came to me and said, we think this family is exploiting the temple, we think they're taking more and blah, blah, and we're really unhappy with them. When I went to talk to the couple, they said, no, this is the reverse. We're the ones who are being exploited. And I tried to find out what the agreement was, but I couldn't because everyone agreed that the written agreement was no longer valid. That everyone agreed on, but no one could agree on what the oral agreement was. It had changed so many times. So I decided to start fresh, and I did everything with numbers. Math doesn't lie, you know. So like I went to the couple, what service are you doing? How many hours a week? Went to the temple treasurer. If you were to pay somebody for this, what would you pay? What is these hours worth in money? And then I went back to the couple and I said, this is what the treasurer says your time is worth in money. Do you agree? I got everybody to agree on those numbers. Then what is the temple giving this couple and facility? What is that worth financially? Got everybody to agree. I was talking to each side separately, got everyone to agree. Then we put all those numbers together on one, spreadsheet. What did this couple do? What was the monetary value? What did the temple give? What was the monetary value? Put it on a spreadsheet, got everybody in one room, handed it out. There was pin drop silence for 10 minutes. Everyone's just looking at the numbers. And it was the whole temple council there and the couple. And the couple had given 5 times more to the temple than the temple had given to them when you calculated the numbers. It was really interesting. And so there was this total silence. And then after 10 minutes, it was like, oh. And I said, next time, have your agreements in writing, and when you change them in writing. Right? So there was a mix there. People were trying to mix having a business relationship and having a family relationship. And so everybody was dissatisfied. So if you're actually going to have a loving relationship, then it's not a business relationship. Now, that doesn't mean you can't love the people you do business with, but it's a different type of relationship. Does this make sense to everybody? I can shop at a place where I have love and affection for the people who are running the business, and they can have love or affection for me, but when I'm going to buy something from them, that exchange is not a loving exchange. It's a business exchange. Now, we can do that business exchange to please Krishna, and we could do that, but it's a different kind of exchange. Is this clear to everybody? And when I pretend that I'm having just a pure loving family exchange and it's actually business, I pollute everything. And if I have actually a business mentality and I pretend that it's family, then I also pollute everything. Yes? I was once in a country I will not name, and I was talking to a bunch of devotees who were medical doctors. And they said, oh, we were working for a devotee clinic, and we left that to come here. And I said, why would you want to leave working for a devotee clinic? And they said, well, they said to us, this is service, Prabhu, so we expect you to work on weekends, and we expect you to work 12 hours a day. We're going to pay you for 8 hours, but we expect you to work 12. They said, we had no time for our family, no time to preach, and hardly any time for our sadhana. But it goes the other way too. I've talked to devotees who run businesses that employ devotees, and the devotees will say, oh, I'm going to India for Kartik for 2 months. Bye-bye. Or today's Narottama Das's disappearance day, I'm going to sit home and sing bhajans and see you later. And if the employers complain, they say, well, we're devotees, right? So these things have to be very clear. But we know that the relationship we have is actually this kind of calculated exchange if I become very disturbed, offended, hurt, depressed. When I don't get the kind of reciprocation I think I am due, and I start calculating what I have given. Have we all done this at some point in our lives? Yeah. And Krishna's statements here are really heavy. No dharma, no prema, no friendship, no happiness. Heavy. Told you wouldn't be happy at the end of this class. I did warn you that. The second category. So those who sow affection even for those who are inimical. So here we have 2 categories. We have pure devotees and family. So some people are naturally compassionate towards everyone, or like family, especially parents, who lovingly serve children even if the children don't reciprocate or are ungrateful or go bad. Now here, Krishna says the opposite. He says, here you have lasting dharma and lasting prema. They feel the other's happiness and distress like their own. Actually, Srila Prabhupada gives this as the definition of what's spiritual and what's material. Say, what's spiritual is when you feel others' happiness as yours and others' distress as yours. And materially, you're happy at others' distress and you're distressed at others' happiness. Even when there's no reciprocation. And the example our acharyas give of the pure devotees is Prahlad. So his father was ungrateful and still Prahlad loved him. He still cared about him. Now Prahlad wasn't a fool. He said, my father's been offensive to you, to me, but please liberate him without suffering. If people do actually offend us, we should want them to be rectified, but we should want them to be rectified joyfully. Now in this verse, Krishna calls the gopis thin-waisted women. So the acharyas say that this was the gopis' middle category. So Krishna is like this middle category of persons, like your beautiful waist. This describes pure love, and this is the love you gopis have for me. And here's a little hint at what he's going to bring out later. That really, my lack of reciprocation is to showcase your love. And the other category is family members. So I once read about this police officer who was looking for a serial killer, and it turned out the serial killer was his own son. So he wanted his son to be in jail for being a criminal, but he still had love for his son. He didn't stop loving his son. He still visited his son in prison. He still cared for him. Now, of course, in this world, even family isn't always like this. I no longer assume that people have a functional family. Like Prabhupada says, you should cry, you should chant like a child calling for their mother, but some people have horrible mothers that they would never call for. But ideally, normal, healthy people, there's this relationship, especially parents to children, but even brothers and sisters, and husbands and wives, this concept that even if somebody is ungrateful, even if somebody, I still love them. Again, I might not want to live with them. I might be happy that they're in jail, but I still love them. I still care about them. I don't become inimical to them. So here there's no merchant mentality at all. You give nothing to me, still I love you, still I care about you. Third category, ungrateful people. Now here Krishna has a lot of subcategories. So the first one is the Atma Arama. These are people who are like Sukadeva Goswami. He's an Atma Arama. He has spiritual happiness, and so he just leaves home. And his father's following and calling for him, he just leaves home. They're already so satisfied, they don't need anybody. And so they appear to be unloving, and they may appear to be ungrateful, but that's because they already have their full spiritual life in their heart. Then there are others who are not satisfied spiritually, but materially. They have everything they want. They have everything they can possibly desire, and so you might try to establish a relationship with them, and they're just not interested because they already have all the relationships that they want. So aptakama, they already have everything they want. They're not reciprocating with you. Then you have the akritya gyan. So these people, they want a loving relationship. The other two categories don't. Atmarama and Aptakama, they just don't want a loving relationship with you because they already have everything either spiritually or materially. The Akritya, they want a loving relationship, but they don't know how. They just don't know how to do it, and they're just kind of blind. They don't see what others do for them. Right? A man comes home from work and his wife has a 15-course meal and he just thinks, well, of course she does. She's my wife. That's just what he doesn't even notice. Right? And the man comes home and he's relaxing and the wife says, you haven't fixed the doorknob and you haven't tried. And he's like, I just came back from work. You know, well, you just have to do that. You're the husband. It's what you're required to do. You know, you just take what people do for granted. You forget that everything's volunteer. You forget that every single thing that anybody does for you, it's all volunteer. And you're just ungrateful. Well, yeah, they have to do that. They're living in the temple, they have to do that. Well, they're in ISKCON leader, they have to do that. That's their job. Instead of saying, wow, that they're doing something nice for me that they don't need to do. I should be grateful. That's different than a merchant mentality. Gratitude is different from a merchant mentality. Gratitude is a sign of humility. And this kind of mentality is very prideful. And there's a sense of entitlement. When you're very entitled, you don't notice what other people do. I think I really got some glimpse of this on my 45th birthday when the devotees had a big party for me, and it was completely unexpected, just completely. And I thought, wow, when I don't expect anything, then what I get is just pure joy. And conversely, one year on my birthday, I was traveling, and I came to one of my kids' house. I got there at like 6 o'clock at night on my birthday, and I walk in and nobody said happy birthday to me. And I'm thinking, don't my family even know it's my birthday? Aren't they even going to say happy birthday? Just so that then I had a feeling of entitlement, you understand? And then even if they said happy birthday to me, I'd be thinking, well, of course they say happy birthday to me. They're my family. That's what they're supposed to do. You see? And what I realize is our amount of joy is inversely proportional to how much we feel we're entitled to something. The more entitlement I feel, the less happiness I get from what I get. Gratitude is one of the 14 items of knowledge. It's also one of the qualities of Krishna, and one of the qualities of the liberated soul. And people who have a high sense of entitlement, they can't reciprocate love because they don't even see what people are doing for them. They just take it all for granted. By the way, these get progressively worse. Like the Atmaramas, that's fine. But we start getting worse and worse categories. Then you have the Guru Druha. The Guru Druha does see what people do, but hates them. That's so weird. I ran into this as a school principal. That you often have, thankfully not always, but you often have very, very difficult parents you're dealing with when you run a school. I mean, after all, you're dealing with their children, and they're giving you their children and their money, two of their biggest attachments. And so, naturally, they feel they have some right to be critical. But some are really critical. And I finally, one time, I realized that the most difficult, most critical parents were all in the category of people for whom I had made some special concessions for. I'd done something special. They'd said, you know, can you do this favor for me with the school? And I'd said yes. Now, out of all the people that we'd done favors for, most of them were grateful, but there was a subset that weren't. And all of the most difficult parents were in that subset. And I was thinking, why? You would think that people for whom you'd done something for would be the most grateful. Why were all the most inimical people in that category? And I realized we don't like feeling we owe somebody something. You know, if you've got a merchant mentality, so if you're coming in with a merchant mentality and someone's giving you more than you think you can repay, like if they're giving you less, you get offended. But if they're giving you more, then you feel very uncomfortable. Right? If you owe someone money and you don't have that money to pay them, every time you see them, you're going to feel very uncomfortable. And you may criticize them. You don't think you can pay them back, so you go, wait, master, wait. And that way you don't feel like paying them back. So this is this Guru Druha. They're aware of how much they're getting, but instead of being grateful, they become inimical and they become critical. Okay, so we have some subcategories of these. People who are critical when there is some reason. The other party wasn't just giving, maybe they made a mistake. Maybe they did something wrong, maybe a small reason, but they have some excuse. Well, I can criticize this person, I can hate this person because I have an excuse. A person who has no excuse. These are, again, we're getting worse and worse categories. So one is the person who hates a benefactor where there is an excuse, there is some reason. One is where there's no reason. Person A is only giving and person B is hating. Then they're not only hating, they're harming. Person A is giving and person B not only hates, but actually harms. And this is the worst type of Guru Druha. So now we have this summary. So Krishna's made these 9 categories. So the first one is a selfish business exchange, where I'm pretending it's a loving exchange, There's nothing wrong with a business exchange. It's a business exchange. But if I'm pretending there's a loving exchange and actually it's a business exchange. The second is where there's selflessness, and there's two categories. The pure devotees who actually love everyone, genuinely, and family where we're loving people because we consider that they're part of us. Then those who are indifferent. So again, this is progressing in evilness. So the first is a self-satisfied spiritualist. There's no evil, there's no fault, although they may appear to be indifferent. Then a materialist who has all their desires fulfilled, so they don't need or want a loving relationship. Then we have ungrateful people who are foolish. They're unaware of what people do for them. They just don't see it. They're so self-absorbed, they just don't even know. They don't notice. Then we have inimical, those who hate benefactors for some cause, there's some reason, those who hate those for no reason, and those who not only hate those for no reason, but they actually injure them. So looking at these lists, we might try to think, okay, am I guilty of anything other than 2A? Have I ever engaged in anything other than 2A? And you know, the problem, my dear friends, is when we're guilty of any of these, we tend to blame the other party. We don't tend to look at maybe the whole basis of my relationship is defective in myself. Now, the only way to really rectify this is to start acting on the 2A relationship, on the selfless giving as pure devotee. That's the only way. Like, you know, there's that very difficult to understand quote about materialistic people have no good qualities. And other times Prabhupada will say materialists do have some good qualities. So materialistic people can display all sorts of good qualities until they feel threatened. So the higher up you are in the gunas, the less easily you feel threatened. If you're deeply in tamagun, somebody brushes against you and you'll punch them. If you're very high in sattvagun, it takes a very big insult. Like your son-in-law doesn't get up to receive you when you come into Lord Brahma's sacrifice in front of everybody. He was a son of Lord Brahma. He was really up there in sattvagun. So what is it that triggers our bad qualities depends on how high up we are in the gunas. Does this make sense to everybody? The lower you are in the gunas, the more easily you're going to think it's someone else's fault that this relationship isn't going well. And the higher you are in the gunas, the more you're taking personal responsibility for how you feel. Now, I'm not saying if someone's abusing you, you should hang around and have people abuse you. I'm not saying that. But we see that Prahlad even is the well-wisher of his abuser. He doesn't desire ill for him. He's glad he was killed. He doesn't lament that he was killed. He's garlanding the Singaday for killing him, but he doesn't desire ill for him. So the only solution is to actually love Krishna. What happens when we fill our hearts with love of Krishna is we feel completely full. We feel completely satisfied, and as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, then we have no need to depend on any other living being. If I am already full, then I will only have relationships with others out of freedom. This Atmarama and Aptakama persons, if they do choose to have a relationship with someone, they don't need anything. It's just that's why we say liberation is the basis for bhakti. First, one has to be liberated from thinking that one has anything to get. And then one can just give. And this process of giving, I think of it metaphorically, I have kind of this picture and this feeling that like if there's an underground spring of water, but somehow it was plugged, it was stopped up, and if you took out the plug, the spring would just come and fill everything. So it's like in our heart, there's this unlimited spring of love for Krishna, but we've stopped it up with our greed and our envy and our lust and all this stuff. And as that's removed, our heart starts to fill with our love for Krishna. And as King David says, my cup is overflowing. It's so full that it's just overflowing, 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 overflowing. And then I can genuinely give and give and give and give and give without worrying about what people give back to me. Then I can be genuinely grateful. Then I can be genuinely humble. Like when we saw Prabhupada in 1976, and our oldest son was sitting on my lap, and Prabhupada said, just like this mother is loving her child without expectation of return, in the same way one should love Krishna. And my father said, will loving her son help her to love Krishna? And Prabhupada said, no, but loving Krishna will help her to love her son. And the thing which we're going to get into more tomorrow, and this is so important, but we're going to go deeply into it tomorrow, this is not whether or not I feel Krishna loves me, but whether or not I feel my love for him. Now we have this other example under category 2 of family. Has anybody here ever held a very small baby? Who's ever held a baby that wasn't crying? A very small baby that wasn't crying. A happy, very small baby. So it's an incredible, absolutely incredible experience. Like you're just sitting in a chair and you're holding this happy or sleeping baby, and just the little tiny baby doesn't have any demonstrable love for you. If it's a very small baby, the baby probably doesn't even know you exist as a separate person. But you're filled with love for this other being. You just have this, yes? Those of you who've held a baby, a not crying baby, a happy or a sleeping baby. You're just filled with this effect. It's one of the most, I think it's one of the most amazing experiences that anybody can have in the world. And it's this kind of feeling, what's satisfying you is your own love, not the reciprocation. You don't need reciprocation from the child. You're feeling just so happy that you're filled with love. And that's a material example based on the body. So how much would that be true if the person we're feeling this love for is the limitless Krishna? So the more we can fill our heart with and it's already there, this Krishna prema. Please don't believe people who tell you it's not already there, and there are people making this propaganda, and there were people here in Radhadesh not that long ago making this propaganda. Please don't believe them. This love for Krishna is already there in the heart. All it needs to do is be awakened. And when it's awakened, then we will be the kind of person we really want to be. So, when Krishna gave this explanation, the gopis were thinking, all right, you're not anybody in that first one. You're not the merchant. You're not the pure devotee. You're not the family. So, you must be one of those ungrateful people. All right, and tomorrow we will have Krishna explain what he is and what he is not. So, it is late. Questions, comments, additions, subtractions, chastisements, corrections? Yes.
Could you just repeat the sequence that you were saying? One of the loving your father would not help you love Krishna, but loving your child will help. So can you just repeat and clarify?
Okay. So this little baby, I was like 1.5 years old, and Prabhupada pointed me out. It was supposed to be a private darshan with just our family, but the word got out that there was going to be a darshan with Prabhupada, so there were like 40 people in the room. Anyway, so Prabhupada pointed to me, and he said, just like this mother is loving her son without an expectation of return, in the same way you should love Krishna. So then my father said, will loving her son help her to love Krishna? Prabhupada said, no. But loving Krishna will help her to love her son. Is that now clear?
No, the first,
Still not clear.
no, the first part. Kind of like, at the moment I see the contradiction.
Okay, let's just get right to the end of it. Will loving my child help me to love Krishna? No. Loving Krishna will help you to love your child.
But why Prabhupada then said first that
Now you want to confuse yourself again.
yeah, probably.
Probably you want to confuse yourself again. Let's just get, that's the heart of it. The other part's not so important. The other part was the lead up. You see, whenever you tell a narrative, you need to set the scene a little bit. Yes? You don't just give the punchline, you know, you don't just give the end. You want to set the scene. We're sitting in the room, Prabhupada's there, there's 40 people, my son's on my lap, my father's there, and then you get the whole picture. But the essence is that. Loving her son will not help her to love Krishna, but loving Krishna will help her to love her son. That's all you need. You don't need the fact that my father asked a question and Prabhupada said something else. Those are also nice, but that's put aside. So is that part clear? Okay, good. Maybe some of it is that English is not your first language. That could be part of it. Is it your second, third, fourth?
Second.
Second, okay. Sometimes I talk to people English is like their seventh language, you know. Yes?
Sometimes it's not always clear how loving Krishna helps us to love in this world. My mind is going to like Lynn Ludwig's letter in Science of Secularization, where she's complaining about the devotees being very negative toward the world. Or my mind also goes towards just
okay, well let's take that one first, because Prabhupada's reply to that was that they're neophytes.
Right. And then my
so
mind...
just Prabhupada's reply to that was that they're neophytes. So that means if you look at Madhurya Kadambini, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has this, I put it into a chart, but he has this for every stage of bhakti, how much are you selfish and how much do you love Krishna? So you start off, you're this much selfish and you have a trace of love for Krishna. And then it goes like this, you know, as your love for Krishna increases, your selfishness decreases. And somewhere in the middle, I'm guesstimating about 40%. Prabhupada will usually put it at 50%. Then, you know, that's nista, that's steadiness in bhakti. So ka nista means you're unsteady. So someone who's unsteady, they have just a small amount of love for Krishna and mostly selfishness. I once said that in a class and a devotee would come to my classes for weeks after that. She was so offended. How dare you say I only have a trace of love for Krishna? I said, I wasn't talking about you. I don't know where you are in this, you know. So that's they don't have much love for Krishna. Okay, next one.
No, I don't think that's okay.
Oh, okay. Prabhupada says it's gradual and proportional. To whatever extent I'm full of... Okay, again, if you have this metaphor, and this is something I not only envision, but I actually feel. That like my heart is like this reservoir, and there's this unlimited spring in it, and there's a plug in it. I actually feel like that. So, you know, when there's a plug, you can loosen it just a little bit. You understand? Or like if you have a water hose, you know, and if you just... It still has some kinks in it, still has some places where it's bent, but maybe you start unbending and then a trickle of water comes out. It's something. So when just this little trickle of water comes out, we're like, wow, Krishna consciousness is really something. But really it's just like this little trickle, you know, because we still have all these kinks in the hose. And these other things are still operating to some extent. However much we're flooded with love of Krishna, to that extent these things are not operating. So when we're, and again, I'm not saying we should hang around for people to beat us and insult us. I'm not saying we should do that. But to whatever extent we're feeling disturbed in our relationships, we should also know that it's because I've still got the wrong mentality to some extent. You understand? Even if the other person's acting wrongly, that's their business. That's between them and God. That's not. But if I'm disturbed by that, it means that I have something wrong. Prahlad wasn't disturbed. He knew his father was an abuser. He knew his father should be punished, but he wasn't personally disturbed. Can you tell the difference? You understand the difference? Okay, we should probably end it. It's 9 o'clock. And we will be having a class tomorrow. So I think after we get, and I told you wouldn't be so happy today, I already warned you that. So after we look at the verses tomorrow, where hopefully you'll be happier. And then if there's still some questions, we should have time for that too. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.